Yo, 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 I'm Josh Paulson, and I want to talk about decoupling, and we're going to do it in the context of JavaScript, but these concepts are applicable to other languages. If you're interested in me talking about how to decouple properly in Unity, I'd be happy to make another video on that. But for this video, partly because I saw that a lot of people were really interested in the moving from web dev to game dev, I figured that talking about decoupling in the context of JavaScript is probably more familiar with a lot of people and will help introduce you to the concepts better. So the concepts, applicable in other languages, but we are working within JavaScript, so be warned while you enter here. Okay, so we got this modules folder. I'm going to show you an example of where I decoupled. So inside of here, we've got this modules folder, and it has all of these different packages, all these different modules, I'm calling them. Now, if I delete any of these, the project still runs. Any of these modules deleted is fine. There's one that hooks it up to OBS that lets it listen for WebSockets. Like you see that I have this over here. I can click around here and all this. This is my Twitch tooling that you're seeing right now. This is all that live, and I can actually just show you. I've got this screen here, but the logic is set up to be decoupled. So I can click over here and then it will generate stuff throughout. I know we're getting the infinite mirror, which is fun, but this is how it's decoupled, and it lets me have all these different controls that can overlay over the stream, and I can make different decisions. But for you, you just see this, and it looks beautiful. I think it does. Anyway, what I want to talk about, I'm a programmer, not a designer, although I got a designer's help. But the important thing is decoupling. So here we've got all these modules. If we deleted this whole folder, the server would still run. It wouldn't have any of this logic in it, so it would be kind of lame and unexciting, but it would work. And I want to show you how you can do that in JavaScript. And I want to talk about why you would want to do this as well. And I also want to talk about what the heck decoupling actually is, because people use the term decoupling just like they like to use any other buzzword, you know, to sound smart. So I like to sound smart, but I try to actually be smart, not just sound smart. And so my hope is that I can help you. So what we are looking at here is we are looking at having a part of a project that can be removed and the rest of the project still works. So decoupling does not necessarily mean that no parts of your project connect them up. It doesn't necessarily mean that parts of your project aren't connected somehow. It's that the core of those parts of the project do not know about each other. You'll actually see, and I'll show you, there is some code that connects these modules to the main project. But it's just that. That is the only part that connects it. So for example, if I were to go into OBS, you're going to see that there's a bunch of different files in here. It's not the greatest organization. I apologize. But you see that we've got the server integration file, and then we've got our OBS manager. Now, OBS manager knows nothing about the server. Server integration, on the other hand, does. And I'm actually going to jump into another project because the Twitch tooling is more complicated. It has a lot more to it. And so I'm going to show you a project that is over-engineered to my heart's delight called Button MRE. Button Mildly Remastered Edition. By the way, this is available on Steam. It's Josh Paulson's Button Mildly Remastered Edition, and it's amazing, and you should buy it, and you should definitely play it, and then pay for 1,000 friends to get it. Don't do 1,000 friends, because you could buy gumballs instead. But anyway, this is a meme game that's been a lot of fun to work on, and part of what I'm doing with it is I'm making it in JavaScript, partly because I think it's funny. Some people will be upset that I'm making it in JavaScript, and I think that's totally legitimate, because I would rather make games in engines that are not JavaScript. So but I did it here. Some people will be upset that I just said that. That's fine. You're allowed to be upset. You know what else you're allowed to do? Eat chicken nuggets, and you're also allowed to continue watching this video. So we've got our button audio controller here as an example of decoupling. Now, what's going to happen if I play the game? Button audio controller is currently enabled. So I'm just going to show you. I think that you're going to be amazed at what happens. You won't believe number 4. Number 12 will shock you. So I'm going to run this on the stream in a way that basically it's a special file. You don't need to know about this, but you know what you do need to know about? You need to know about this. This is the button. So you click it, and you can hear the pressing and the releasing. So that is all handled by the button audio controller, which, as I said, I'm making this game ridiculous. I'm not really over-engineering it for the goals that I have for the game. The game is ridiculous, and there's so much stupid stuff in it. That's the point. So that it's making this really simple concept that is kind of dull and stupid into this dramatic, oh my goodness, this is my magnum opus kind of story. I'm really selling the story, not the game. I'm selling the updates, not the game. Anyway, or the project updates like posts and all that. It's more so selling the story. That's not important. You know what is important? It's important that we talk about decoupling. So if we go through here, you can see that there's a game controller. This hooks everything together. But if we look through here, you're going to see that there is no reference to game controller at all. It doesn't know what a game controller is. If we look at our constructor, it runs this .initialize, and that runs a bunch of logic. But if we go down here, we don't see any place, anywhere, that it knows what the heck game controller is. And interestingly enough, if we go into game controller, we're going to see that it has a reference to available server modules. But even here, we don't know about button audio controller itself. This is just a name for a folder. That's it. Now, what does it do? Now, again, this is a way that you can decouple in JavaScript. The setup would be a bit different in Unity or in different projects, but here is a way that you can decouple in JavaScript. So we've got all of these initializers that are what hook together this to the main game. So we've got our initializers, and if I end up going to button audio controller and I look for our initializer here, button audio controller initializer, you're going to see that this has an initialize method. This takes in the game controller. And so we could pass along any data that we need to the button audio controller. And then this hooks up listeners. And I'm going to talk about what the listeners are and what that means more in detail. But we've got this. This is the only place the button audio controller and game controller touch. If this folder is removed from the project, the game still works. But button audio controller does not know about game controller. Game controller, it right now knows the folder exists. I can change that so that it just gets all the folders, but right now it's more manual. But game controller, it knows the name of the folder, but it doesn't know what a button audio controller is. And so these two do not know about each other. The initializer knows about both of them and hooks them together. Let me show you how I can just disable this part of the project and everything else still works. So if we go into source, we're going to see that we have these scripts and we're going to see plugins. These are all the plugins. Now they've got the shared abstract initializer class, and that's a very simple class I'll show you later. But if we look through here, we see that there's button audio controller. This is that thing that gives us the magical clicking sound. Now, if we end up going, now, again, this game is over-engineered for the sake of the memes, so if you're like, why the heck do you need that? Okay, it's a good demonstration of the concept because it is specifically over-engineered for the purpose of memes, although for the goals of the game, it's not over-engineered, but anyway. Please don't get hung up on that, even though I'm getting hung up on it right now. Stop getting hung up on that. Okay, we've got our initializer here, hooking up the listeners. Now let's try disabling this part of the project. Button audio controller, you're out. You didn't have enough chicken nuggets in your app, and for that reason, I'm out. Okay, now let's, whoops, I refreshed the wrong thing. Let's refresh this. So we've just restarted the game. There's no sound. It's gone. What happened? Well, we decoupled this, but it's set up in a way where if we just don't load it in, it just doesn't work and nothing errors out. You're going to see if we go into the console, there are no errors. And here it says all the plugins that were hooked up, and we see that the button audio controller, we got button graphic controller, we got audio recording controller, but we don't have button audio controller. So this part of the project is well decoupled because we can remove it and the rest of the game still works just fine. Now let me re-enable it, and I want to talk more about what's actually happening in the initializer. So you're going to see here that it's exporting the class initializer. We could actually improve this a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. If we go back into game controller, it's looking through each of the folders. It is looking at the folder name here, and it is grabbing initializer.js. This is initializer.js in button audio controller. And if we look through all of the plugins, each of these has an initializer.js file. Now, I could end up taking the files that are not part of the initializer and put them into a subfolder or things like that. I haven't, but that would be very reasonable to do if we wanted to make a clear statement of, hey, this is the folder that you remove from the project that takes it out of the project. We could do that. But right now it's just initializer and then whatever's there. So each of these has an initializer file, and each of them inherit from our initializer class. Now, because it's JavaScript, it doesn't really matter. We don't need to have a shared class. This is the wrong project. We don't need it to have the same shared class. I just do that because it helps me keep track of the two things that I always need. And if we go into abstract initializer, you'll see that it's just got these two things. It's a really basic class. It's just got initialize, it takes in the game controller, and then we have got get out of here, get blame. It's all my fault anyway. We've got initialize, and we throw an error if we don't have this overridden, and we've got hookup listeners, which also throws an error if it is not set up properly. And the initialize takes in the game controller, hookup listeners takes in the game controller and the specific module, which I know I'm using different terminology. I'm sorry. Anyway, it should probably be plugin, but we've got game controller module here. And so then if we go back to button audio controller, you can see that initialize, it creates the module and it returns it. And so any logic that's needed here happens here. And here we've got hookup listeners. Now, you might be wondering, what the heck do you mean by listeners? Well, we've got these events and we have all of these event listeners. So when an event is fired, we end up running logic. So if you've worked in web code much, then you're familiar with the DOM and you're familiar with add event listener. I have my own listener set up for this that has a few different tweaks, but it's the same concept. So if you look at event pressed, I'm not going to dig into the event logic that I have specifically because if you're interested in that, let me know. But this is kind of similar to add event listener pressed. And then it's kind of like this. This is basically what it is. It's got a few differences, and that's why I made it separately, but this is kind of the same thing. You could use regular JavaScript events instead if you wanted to. I don't really like them, so I didn't deal with it. So here we've got add event listener, pressed, and released. And so what we are doing then is that we are saying in this one spot, we are listening for things that happen on the button controller. And when something happens from the button controller, we are running logic on this module, the button audio controller. So when the button is pressed, when the button controller tells us, hey, the player pressed the button, we are running this logic module button audio controller dot on button pressed. So if we go into here, this is what happens when the button is pressed. So we've got this chain going on that is decoupling the logic. So there is a place where it's hooked together. But again, the key thing here is that game controller itself doesn't need to know about either of these things. It doesn't need to know about button controller. It doesn't need to know about button graphic controller. It just needs to know where to kind of load it in. And then the initializer is what actually hooks them together. In this case, this initializer knows that there is something called button controller and it gets it for us. And then with that button controller, it is listening for these events and hooking it together. This is the only thing that hooks all of this together. It's just these 11 lines of code. I can do math. So if we go into the button controller event pressed, we're going to see that if I check this out, it's got a new event. This is my own custom type. And we just go into here and it's invoking it. This logic's a bit more complicated, but all that you really need to care about is it's running the event, it's invoking it. And when this fires, when this is run, you could use custom events in JS again. You could do that whole setup instead. I just liked my own class. I liked my own setup a bit more for other reasons. Then inside of here, when that's invoked, this logic gets run. That's it. So in general with decoupling, what you can do is that you can have events on one instance. And so rather than having, because here's what you would see in some different code bases and that gets really difficult to control and couples everything. You would see something like button audio controller dot instance dot play or on pressed, something like this. This is something that you would see a lot. And the problem is that now if you want to remove button audio controller or replace it with something else or pull it into another project, you've made it so that this part is dependent on that. So here's something else that can be handy. If you want to debug part of your project and you're trying to you can start to clear some things out that you don't care about just to try to isolate the problem. You can end up digging more into one specific module and know that it shouldn't be directly touching anything else. So you can pretty safely work in it and you're fine. It allows you to hoist parts of your project into other projects a lot more easily. Like if I just look at the initializer for button audio controller, I can take this into another game. Now, this is kind of a dumb example because button audio controller, this game is over-engineered, okay? I know that. But as far as examples go, this could be hoisted into another project and I'm like, oh, this is basically what I need to listen for? Okay, I can take care of that pretty easily. You want to have multiple buttons that have different logic or something. Again, this is ridiculous for this context. But this allows me to keep the logic not knowing about each other except for that there's this one little point. Remove this module, the game still works. The whole project still runs just fine. I'm going to show you a bit of a more complex example. It's just a little bit more, but we got button graphic controller. Now in this case, whenever we initialize, we do pass in the game controller. Again, this is the only place that knows about all these different things. And here it will get data from the game controller, and we could just reference it directly. I didn't want to in this case, but if we knew that it was only one value, people will get into like getters versus fields or whatever. Do whatever you want. Just make sure that you're accomplishing your goals effectively. Then new button graphic controller. In this case, we are passing along the elements. We are not passing in game controller. That's where this can go wrong. If you're just like, oh, we're initializing it, we're decoupling it, let's just pass in game controller and let it figure out everything. No, this is what we're trying to avoid. It should not know what game controller is. Don't pass in game controller. Bad. Pass in only the data that it needs. Maybe it needs a lot of data. Well, this is where you could have a lot more things. If you were like, hey, we want to create it, but we want to set up a lot of things, like you could have connect button holder. Like I could have this in different, like be a bunch of different functions, right? Button holder, yeah. I could split this out. So if you really are like, I hate this, that's fine. You have other options. But the idea is that all the initialization logic is in here, and then we're hooking up all the listeners in here, and you might be like, well, why is that separate? Because I liked it. You could put this up in here, except for that the reason why I had it separate was just really because I liked it. I think that I wanted to have a separate dispose method, and that just felt a little bit cleaner. I liked having hook up listeners, because then if I have a dispose method, then I can just look directly up here and see everything that I need to disconnect. That's irrelevant for right now, but that is a nice benefit as well. That is actually an important part of some of this decoupling, is that you need to, you might need to disconnect what you have decoupled. I'm not going to get into that right now. The main thing, I'm assuming that this is always in the game. I'm assuming that this is always set up this way for you. So to decouple, you have something in the middle that connects the two different parts of the project via events, and then the project pieces don't have to know about each other. So if you have any questions on that, or on, hey, how would you use this in game development? I'd be happy to show how you could use that in a Unity game. It's definitely helped me make my code base a lot cleaner. It's helped me to isolate problems a lot more easily. It's helped me to feel a lot better about adding different parts into a project, because I just have this one connection point. It makes it so much easier, makes my code so much more readable. It helps me to isolate all the different problem spaces a lot more easily. So I'll throw out a few different things that I do. If you're interested in tutoring, you're like, hey, this is helpful, but I would like some one-on-one, then you can contact me on Wisant or Fiverr. I'll have some links for that down below. I also do create browser source tooling for different streamers. So I can click and drag this. I can grab my little avatar, throw them around. I can select chat. I have a lot of different cool features that I've been working on. I've got things where I can listen to the voice and play different videos on screen and all that. And I would love to help you out with your project if you're interested. So I'll have links to that down below as well. And I hope that you just have a fantastic rest of your day. And I hope that this helps you with decoupling some of your JavaScript project and feeling more confident about what you're doing. So have a fantastic day and take care.